Welcome to a few basic, simple reflections on this, the day after Good Friday, the commemoration of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Compared to what would have happened yesterday, today is a very quiet, inactive, serene, passive day. Quite understandably, because the impact of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, that crowning event in which the sinless, guiltless man was crucified, takes time to sink deeply into the consciousness of humankind. It takes us a while to reckon with, if not reconcile ourselves with, events of this magnitude. So, this is a somber, quiet, thoughtful, contemplative mood. And keeping that in mind, I'm going to share with you, assuming that you'll be interested in the theme I'm going to develop, the thoughts that comes uppermost in my mind as I reflect on the crucifixion of Jesus Christ from the perspective of the religious authorities of his day. And that theme is the theme of problem solving. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ can be read from a particular perspective as the tragedy of problem solving. And in that sense, this is an event of universal application, the relevance of which will never fade as long as history goes on the way it does. At the individual level, at the collective level, at the micro level, at the macro level. The problem of problem solving remains a very basic issue for humankind. So, this issue is raised in a very poignant and pertinent manner by the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Put very simply, Jesus was killed because he was a problem for the religious establishment of the times. Therefore, the establishment decided to solve its problem, and the result is his judicial murder on the cross of Calvary. So, it's a classic instance of problem solving. But then we have to wait for another 24 hours to see if the problem has been resolved or if the problem has been now redefined and reconfigured in a very different manner. That will forever remain an interesting question mark in the corridor of time. Now, let's very briefly examine this. From the very beginning of human history, problem solving has had its place in the realms of human thought. Suddenly, our mind goes back to a figure or a person like Cain, who killed his brother Abel in order to solve his problem. And the only way he thought he could solve the problem that his brother posed to him, the very existence of his brother posed to him, was to get rid of his brother. No, so it's a universal pattern of solving one's problem. Let's consider a second instance. Now, we know that the Jews, when the going got tough in their land, went into Egypt in search of better prospects, in search of food, etc., etc. What happened? They solved their problem for the time being, which paved the way for a much larger problem. They ended up in slavery that lasted nearly 5 centuries. So the way we solve our problem could be just the antechamber to another problem, and we create more problems by solving our problems. So there is a need to pause and reflect about the conundrums and contradictions immanent in this universal pattern or universal phenomenon of problem solving as applied to our species. Consider also another example. We think of Herod, the king. He came to know that a boy was born and he is bound to be the king of the Jews. Obviously, he wouldn't brook it. A huge problem, a problem that rattled him, suddenly came into being. And he tried to solve the problem in his own way. He couldn't get hold of the boy. Therefore, he ordered that all male children below the age of 5 in that region should be put to death. And some 2,000 innocent children were massacred. Did that end his problem? Not at all. Now consider this issue, this instance of problem solving, which is now closest to our meditation, which is the way the Judaic authorities solved their problem, the problem called Jesus Christ. They crucified him. Did that solve their problem? Not at all. So there is this interesting pattern that is raised or unveiled by the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, a pattern of universal and timeless significance, and therefore it is certainly appropriate for us in the wake of the Good Friday, the day in which the religious authorities solve their problem, to reflect on this whole pattern and problem of problem solving. Now, when it comes to solving the problem, you and I would agree that the very first thing to do is to understand the problem that we want to solve. And most people don't realize that this is such a huge issue that very often we are not really trying to solve the real problem. We are trying to address something that we think is the problem. Our real problem may be something else. And therefore, with the best of our efforts, with the most sincere, protracted efforts, we'll really end up nowhere. The problem will persist and our situation will go from bad to worse. So the first thing to do is to understand our problem right. What exactly is our problem? Now, for example, if you ask teenage children, quite a few of them would say that our only problem is our parents because they try to limit our freedom. You ask people in the workplace, many of them would say our biggest problem is our boss. You ask a student in school, why couldn't you fare better? He will give you an excuse that involves somebody else. I couldn't study well because of this, that, and the other. Now, all these statements may have an element of truth, but that element of truth may not be the central one or the decisive one. So, the real task in any situation of encountering problem is to understand the problem. It's here the issue that Jesus raised from the cross of Calvary, namely that we lack understanding. You know what Jesus said, Father, forgive, for they know not what they do. They do not know the problem that they are facing. They do not really know if there is a problem or a blessing. They do not know how to handle it. And therefore they are handling it in this manner, which is a worse problem than what they initially considered to be their problem. In the first place, it was not their problem. They mistook it to be their problem. In the second place, it was not a problem at all. It was a great blessing for all mankind. And they are now trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist in a manner that is utterly irrelevant. Now, these things are not uncommon. And therefore, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ confronts us with a warning that we have to be very vigilant about understanding our problem and then going about solving it, or problems, and going about solving them. That's the first thing that we need to understand. The second thing to do is to ask a question. What is the purpose behind this problem? First of all, what is this problem? The second question to ask is, what is the purpose behind this problem? Now here, of course, the modern man is at a disadvantage because we are living in a climate of opinion in which asking questions about purpose is considered to be too naive, too simple, and too idiotic. The great wisdom of the modern age is to assume that life is a drift of random and meaningless events that do not constitute a steady progression towards a meaningful end, We come into this world, certain things happen to us, and we react in this manner or that manner. Then night comes and we enter into eternal sleep. Now, if you think of your predicament in that manner, surely this particular observation I have made makes no sense. A central assumption in the spiritual vision of life is that nothing is meaningless or everything is pregnant with meaning. And the idea of meaning is always correlated with purpose. What is purposeless is also bound to be meaningless. So if you assume that the problem that you're facing now, assuming that you've understood it right, is a purposeful thing, then the question comes up, what is the purpose hidden behind this problem? And surely you can't manage the problem and solve the problem right if you're indifferent, if you're blind to or ignorant about the purpose underlying the problem. So that's the second important. First, understand the problem right and become aware of the complexity in understanding the problem, and the reality also that many people don't understand the problems that afflict them, right? Second thing is to ask the question, what is the purpose behind this problem? For example, if I may cite an example from the New Testament, Paul had a problem, and he sort of refers to it in a kind of idiomatic or poetic fashion by saying, there is a thorn in my flesh. Now, obviously, that's not a literal description of his problem. And he prays to God to deliver him from that problem. And 3 times he gets the answer, my grace is sufficient for you. So we have to be mindful of the fact that our intuition or understanding of the purpose underlying the problem that we are facing today needs to be itself critiqued, and a huge margin left for the possibility that we are trying to solve our problem or we are trying to react to our problem without any idea, without any adequate idea as to what the underlying purpose of the problem. I, for one, believe that nothing happens to our life without a purpose. And I want to be more explicit and say, I ardently believe that nothing happens to us without a divine purpose. And to the extent that we discern that purpose and deal with the situation accordingly, we succeed in or do not succeed in solving the problem. That's the second thing I want to say. Third thing is, we need to examine our attitude to the problem. Now, very often, we are a bundle of suppositions, assumptions, prejudices, and inherited notions. Let's take an example so this becomes very clear. The 8th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, you have Jesus and his disciples travel by a boat across Galilee. The boat is beaten by the storm, etc. There is an upheaval in Galilee, and Peter thinks that the boat is about to capsize and they would all perish and meet a watery death. And he panics. And that's obviously a problem, a real, pressing, and scary problem. But Jesus says that's not the problem. The problem is not that the sea is raging or the wind is roaring. The problem is that your faith is little. Now that is something that we need to factor into this whole dynamics of understanding and solving problems. Very often what happens when we face problems is that our attention is focused entirely to factors and forces and agencies outside of ourselves. We rarely look into ourselves to see what exactly is it within us that provokes this problem, and this is particularly true of problems which are repetitive or recurrent. Certain problems recur or repeat themselves. Rest assured, when a certain problem or a certain pattern repeats itself, it has a bearing largely on what is within oneself and very, very marginally on what is outside of oneself. So it's very important, as Jesus tells Peter in this context, to look into oneself and see what it is that within oneself there is that makes this kind of pattern almost a predictable routine. That's the first point that I would like to make. The second thing is the solu- the oh, let me recall an instance so that it becomes again clear. I remember traveling in one of the Arab countries, obviously ministering to the Christians there. And one day late in the night, I had a call from a lady, not too late in the night, about 8 o'clock. And she was very desperate. She wanted to come and see me then and there. And she was at a distance of about half an hour's drive. She asked me if I would give her an appointment. So I gave her an appointment and she came. And she came by about 9 o'clock in the night. And she started talking and talking. And all the time she was talking about her daughter who was at that time in standard 11. What was the problem? The problem was that her daughter was a brilliant student. She was a class topper all the way through. But around the time she joined class 10, she began to slump and slump very badly. And because of my educational background, she thought she could find some insight, if not some help, into understanding this problem. So she couldn't understand what was happening. And there was no way she could make her to tell her what was happening to her daughter. So I engaged that lady in conversation and I began to look into the family situation. And through a long process, I deciphered that her husband had lost his job, which is quite common in these Arab countries. Women who work as nurses, etc., they have far greater stability of employment and income as compared to men. And this man lost his job. That hit him hard. And unfortunately, he took to the bottle. And very soon he became an addict. And as you know, an addict cannot work. So he is nearly ruined. Now, this caused the woman, the wife of the man, to look down upon him as a useless character, a waster, a burden to the family. And her daughter, who was very attached to the father, began to suffer in the process. But she never revealed her inner suffering to her mother. She was feeling devastated, she was feeling crippled, she was feeling completely washed out. She did not know how to handle the situation. The domestic atmosphere was poisonous. The mother was utterly impervious to the fact that her negative and contemptuous attitude, her husband, who unfortunately had fallen upon evil days, was having a devastating effect on the daughter. It was crippling her. Now she comes to me assuming that I'll offer a magical solution. Nobody in this world can offer a magical solution. One can cheat others by pretending that one has a set of magical solutions. But nobody with the slightest concern for truth and self-respect or human dignity will do that. So I told her that the solution to the problem lies in her own hands. The only way out is to undo the harm she has done and to learn to show respect, even if she cannot respect sincerely her husband, at least show respect to her husband in front of her daughter. And she left me. I don't know what has happened, perhaps not been able to follow up. But what I'm saying is, unless and until the root cause is understood, there's no way a breakthrough can be effected. Now, I can go on giving various instances, but time will become a problem. Therefore, very often we must realize that the key to solving a problem will lie within us. But that the devious nature of human nature, or the slippery nature of human nature is such that our mind will persuade us to believe that we are perfectly all right ourselves, but the problem lies somewhere else. And therefore, unless and until those factors change, the situation cannot improve. Whereas the spiritual perspective, the spiritual insight is that the key to a real change is within yourself. And that's why Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see around you. Be the change that you want to see around you. And of course, Mahatma Gandhi understood this through the life and work of Jesus Christ. Every Christian would say that those who went to Jesus Christ got themselves transformed. Why? Because transformation is a radical change. a total discontinuity with the evil ways of the past. Because changing oneself is really the key to changing everything else. The real problem is oneself. If you're honest with ourselves, we'll realize that it's not that we have problems, but that we are the problem. That's where spiritual humility comes. Arrogance is exactly the opposite. Always somebody else is to blame. And such people will waste a lifetime grumbling and complaining about others, and they will never achieve a breakthrough. Whereas the key to the breakthrough rests in this, that we realize in humility before God and in a spirit of truth that we are the problem. And therefore, we need to earnestly pray to God for the grace to be transformed. Because the hardest thing in the world is to change oneself. Changing oneself is as difficult as trying to lift yourself up by your shoestrings. Try and undertake that experiment and you will see how difficult it is. Try and lift yourself up with your own shoestrings or bootstraps. Changing oneself is as difficult as that. We need help. That help can come through an honest understanding of the teachings of Jesus Christ. It can come through accepting the role model of Jesus Christ. It can come through wise counsel from the well-meaning people around, including those at home, the elderly. It can come from reading good books and influences of that kind. But unless and until we are willing to change, there will be no meaningful solution to the problem. Now, if you look at what happened, the drama that was enacted on Good Friday, at the heart of this is the brutal assumption that we are all right. The problem is that man, and if he can be eliminated, then all shall be well. And the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a body blow to that utterly fallacious assumption. There's no assumption worse than this, that all the problems are because of somebody else, and if those people can be settled, all shall be well. You ask the majority community in India, not the majority community, the political group that represents or claims that they represent the majority community in India, the Hindu community, you will be told that all the problems that they face are because of the religious minorities, and the religious minorities mainly being Muslims, who are about 13%, and Christians about 2.18%. So this rump of a people, they are responsible for all the problems faced by Hindus in India, not just now, but over the last 1,000 years. Now the problem is, as long as you remain in this psychology of victimhood, you will make no meaningful or effective efforts to break out of it. Therefore, by embracing this kind of utterly fallacious notion, one is crippling oneself, and that is what is not understood. By trying to solve the problem in the wrong way, you are bypassing the real problem, and you will also ensure that the real problem is never addressed and solved. If there are problems facing the majority community in India, there are problems facing them. The solution is that that community should develop. If there are problems facing the Christian community or Muslim community, the only solution is that these communities must develop. They must become positive to all the opportunities, facilities, provisions that there actually exist in ample measure. But without doing anything of that sort, you go on complaining about X, Y, and Z. Like, for example, the complaint raised by the Catholic bishop in Pala, Bishop Joseph Kannarigand, that the greatest problem facing the church is love jihad, namely Muslim men, young men are prowling all around, waiting to abduct Christian girls under pretext of love and matrimony in order to dump them in the lap of terrorists. Therefore, the solution he expects is that all Muslim youth should be kept under bit and bridle. their freedom of movement should be curtailed so that our girls can be safe. Now, is that a solution? Really? So, this kind of problem solving madness exists everywhere. For example, in the educational context, I can tell you, particularly in schools, very often teachers who are known as strict disciplinarians are people who cannot understand why a student behaves the way he or she does. Let me close by giving you an example. In Delhi, there is a school called United Christian School. For some time, the principal of the school was a young man called Eric Nasser. He subsequently became the Bishop of Delhi and the first moderator of the Church of North India. I have this story from his own mouth. He said that when he was the principal of the school, there was one student who would always come late. The school every day began with an assembly, and he was a strict disciplinarian, and he insisted that everybody should be there before the assembly began. And he took a special note of those who were latecomers, and he spotted this young boy, poor, diffident, nervous-looking fellow. He called him and warned him once, called him twice, called him thrice. Fourth time, he gave him a few cuts on his palm. But the situation did not improve. The boy would never come on time. And he got fed up the next time. He asked the boy to turn his palm upside down so that he can hit him on his knuckles. But when the boy did that, he noticed huge patches of atta on his knuckles. So, Eric Nasser, the principal of the United Christian School, asked the boy what it was. Then the story came out that the boy was being exploited by his stepmother, who made him do all the domestic chores, including cooking for the entire house. He could leave the house, he could come to school only after finishing all the cooking, washing the utensils, etc. And therefore, he could never come on time. Now, without realizing this problem, if the principal of the school turns it into a discipline issue and goes on cudgeling this poor boy, the problem will never be solved. All that he would achieve in doing is possibly to drive out the boy and to shut the door of education against him completely. Fortunately, it came to his notice, and he said his heart broke at that moment, and he decided to do everything possible to encourage and to protect and promote the boy. So what I'm saying is, on this day, in the wake of Good Friday, it's worthwhile to spend a little time quietly meditating on the problem-solving patterns that we adopt. Well, there's a great deal more to be said about it, but I suppose this much will suffice for the time being. And we look forward to the glory and the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ tomorrow, the Easter day. Bye.